The first night I moved into the apartment, my new roommate looked me straight in the eyes and told me I wouldn't last a week living with her. She didn't say it with anger. Somehow, that made it worse. Her voice was calm, almost tired, as if she had already watched dozens of people walk into her life and walk right back out. I stood there holding a cardboard box filled with everything I owned, staring at the woman who was supposed to share the apartment with me for the next year. I could have turned around. I could have picked up my boxes and left. But instead, I smiled and told her I wasn't planning to run away. I didn't know it then, but that simple reaction would become the beginning of something neither of us expected. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can give people a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes, the person who seems the hardest to understand is simply the person who has been hurting the longest. My name is Daniel, and at 27, I had just moved to a new city after losing my job and ending a relationship that I had once believed would last forever. I wasn't looking for adventure. I was looking for somewhere affordable to start over. The apartment was old but clean, located above a small bakery on a quiet street. The rent was surprisingly cheap because the other bedroom already had a tenant, a woman named Maya. When I first met her, she barely opened the door. She looked to be around my age, maybe 26 or 27, wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt with her dark hair tied messily behind her head. Her expression was guarded, and her eyes looked like they hadn't slept properly in years. She looked at my boxes, then at me, and finally stepped aside. The apartment itself was strangely organized. Every object had a place. The shoes were lined up perfectly. The books were arranged by size. Even the kitchen towels were folded into identical squares. There was something almost unnaturally controlled about the place. I tried to make small talk, but Maya answered everything with one or two words. When I accidentally placed one of my boxes near the hallway, she immediately moved it against the wall. When I asked which cabinet I could use, she pointed toward an empty shelf without saying anything. Then came the warning. She told me that previous roommates had complained about her rules, her silence, her routines, and the fact that she didn't like unexpected visitors. According to her, people always thought they could handle it. They never did. Then she looked directly at me and calmly told me that I wouldn't last a week. Most people would have been offended. I was, too. But instead of arguing, I looked around the apartment and noticed something I hadn't noticed before. There were 2 mugs sitting on the kitchen counter, but only one had been used recently. There were photographs on the refrigerator, but every photograph showed Maya standing beside the same older woman. I asked who she was. For the first time, Maya's expression changed. She said it was her mother. I simply nodded and told her that I was sorry. She looked almost surprised that I hadn't asked more questions. The first week was difficult. Maya woke up at exactly 6 every morning. She cooked breakfast at 6:30, cleaned the kitchen immediately afterward, and left for work before 7:30. She hated loud music, hated doors being left open, and absolutely hated anyone touching her things. I tried my best to respect her boundaries, but I was naturally more relaxed. I left my jacket on a chair. Sometimes I forgot to turn off the hallway light. Once, I accidentally used her favorite coffee mug. She found it in the sink. She didn't yell. She simply washed it herself, dried it carefully, and put it back exactly where it had been. I apologized. She said it was fine. But her eyes said it wasn't. One evening, I came home late and found Maya sitting on the kitchen floor. The lights were off. She was holding a photograph in her hands. She didn't notice me at first. I almost walked away. Then I heard her crying. It was quiet crying, the kind people do when they have trained themselves not to make noise. Her shoulders trembled, but she wiped her tears quickly when she realized I was there. I didn't ask what happened. Instead, I sat on the opposite side of the kitchen floor. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Eventually, she told me that her mother had died 2 years earlier. The apartment had belonged to them before her mother became sick. After the funeral, Maya had stayed there alone because she couldn't afford to move and couldn't bear the thought of leaving the place behind. She told me that her mother had been her best friend. Then she said something that stayed with me. She said that after her mother died, everyone told her she needed to move on. But nobody explained what moving on was supposed to look like when every corner of your home reminded you of someone you loved. Suddenly, her strange rules made sense. The perfectly folded towels. The carefully arranged books. The untouched second mug. The silence. She wasn't controlling the apartment. She was controlling the only thing in her life that still felt safe. From that night onward, I stopped seeing Maya as difficult. I started seeing her as hurt. But understanding someone doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes easy. A few days later, I received terrible news. The company I had been hoping to join had cancelled my position. I was nearly out of savings. I had enough money to survive for maybe another month. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone, trying to figure out what to do next. Maya walked in. She looked at me and immediately knew something was wrong. I told her I might have to move out. Her face went completely still. She asked when. I said I didn't know. She turned around and walked into her room. I assumed she was relieved. The next morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was enough money to cover my rent for the next 2 months. I stood frozen. I knew immediately who had left it there. When Maya came home, I put the envelope in front of her. I told her I couldn't accept it. She looked uncomfortable and said she wasn't giving me charity. She was simply helping her roommate. I told her I would pay her back. She said she knew I would. Then she walked away before I could thank her. That was the first time I realized something important about Maya. She didn't know how to say, "I care about you." So she said it through actions. I started noticing other things. When I worked late, she left food in the refrigerator. When I had an interview, she quietly ironed my shirt. When I came home exhausted, she would leave the kitchen light on. She never asked how my day went. But somehow, she always knew when it had been a bad one. Our friendship grew slowly, almost accidentally. We began drinking coffee together on Sunday mornings. We watched old movies when neither of us could sleep. I learned that Maya loved terrible romantic comedies but pretended she hated them. She learned that I sang badly whenever I cooked. And for the first time since moving into the apartment, the place started feeling like home. Then one rainy Thursday night, everything changed. Maya didn't come home. 10 o'clock passed. Then 11. Midnight. I called her phone repeatedly, but there was no answer. Around 1 in the morning, someone finally called me from an unknown number. Maya had been in a car accident. She was at the hospital. I remember standing in the middle of our kitchen, unable to breathe. I grabbed my jacket and ran. At the hospital, she was unconscious, with a bandage above her eyebrow and her hand resting motionless beside her. I sat beside her bed for hours. And somewhere around 4 in the morning, I realized I was crying. I wasn't crying because I was afraid of losing my roommate. I was crying because somewhere along the way, Maya had become family. She opened her eyes the next afternoon. The first thing she saw was me. Her voice was barely a whisper when she asked why I was there. I told her I had nowhere else to be. She smiled weakly. Then she cried. She told me she had been terrified during the accident. Not of dying, but of dying alone. She said that for years she had pushed people away before they could leave her. She had convinced herself that if she never became attached, she could never be hurt again. Then she looked at me and admitted that I had ruined her plan. I smiled through my tears and told her that was probably the first thing I had ever done right. After she came home, something changed between us. Not dramatically. Quietly. Maya stopped locking herself inside her room. She started leaving photographs on the refrigerator again. One afternoon, I noticed that the old second mug was no longer sitting untouched on the shelf. It was beside mine. 2 mugs. 2 plates. 2 people sitting at the same table. Months later, I found a small envelope inside my room. It contained the money I had borrowed from Maya, untouched. There was also a handwritten note. She wrote that she had never expected me to stay. Not through the rules. Not through the silence. Not through the fear. She said she had warned me that I wouldn't last a week because everyone else had left. But I had stayed long enough to teach her something she had forgotten. That people could leave without abandoning you. That kindness didn't always come with conditions. And that sometimes, home wasn't a place you inherited from the past. Sometimes, home was a person who chose to stay. A year after I moved into that apartment, Maya and I were still roommates. The walls were no longer perfectly empty. There were photographs everywhere. There were plants on the windowsill. There were 2 mugs beside the coffee machine. And sometimes, when I came home late, I would find Maya asleep on the couch with the television still playing. I would cover her with a blanket and turn off the lights. The woman who once told me I wouldn't last a week had become the person I trusted most in the world. Not because she changed overnight. Not because I magically fixed her. But because someone finally stayed long enough for her to understand that she didn't have to protect herself from every person who cared. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may be struggling silently, and subscribe for more stories about kindness, healing, and second chances. You never know how much one small act of patience can mean to someone who has forgotten what it feels like to be safe. And before we end, I want you to comment one word below: stay. Because sometimes, the greatest gift we can give someone isn't money, advice, or answers. Sometimes, it is simply showing them that when life becomes difficult, we won't immediately walk away. Maya once believed nobody could live with her. What she really feared was that nobody could live with her pain. And perhaps that was the lesson we both needed. You don't always save people by fixing their problems. Sometimes, you save them by sitting beside them in the dark, refusing to judge their scars, and quietly reminding them that they don't have to face the darkness alone. Because the person who says, "You won't last a week," may secretly be hoping someone will finally answer, "Then I'll stay until you believe you deserve to be loved." And that is exactly what happened. Not because either of us was perfect. But because, for once, neither of us walked away. The end.